Hey everybody, it's Kyle Jetzel, your driven dad. Today I want to tell you a story about the time that my dad talked about my death when I was about 12 years old. And this is pretty interesting because it the conversation at the time freed me up. So when I was I don't know, I could have been 11 or 12, I don't know, pretty young. But I remember that in Dallas, where I grew up, we lived in kind of a rough neighborhood, and time had changed. Twice a year there's spring forward and fall back. And time had changed so that it got darker earlier. And on this day, I had basketball practice, and my basketball practice was about, I don't know, maybe a mile, half a mile to a mile away from my home. And I finished up basketball practice this day. And remember, I'm this skinny little white kid growing up in a kind of a tough neighborhood where I was a minority. And I remember walking out and seeing it being dark. And I'm thinking, oh, geez, this is going to be rough, right? So I remember sprinting. I just took off running from Saint Cecilia was the church gym that we were practicing at. I'll never forget that. And I ran past. There was a big wide open field behind Saint Cecilia. Then I ran in front of the 12 Hills apartments, which were kind of tough apartments, in front of a 7-Eleven, and then in front of another wooded area to my street where I turned down the block, a church on the corner, and then I ran down the street to my house. And by the time I got home, I was exhausted. I was panting. I was sweating. And I remember running inside, I made it without without getting beat up. And I remember my dad was there. And my dad saw me come in the house and he said, "What is going on with you?" Because he saw I was completely and totally out of breath because I had sprinted that mile, half mile to a mile. I don't know how far it was. I'd have to go back and look. You know what? It probably wasn't even that far, but when you're a kid, everything seems far, right? And I remember my dad saying, "What's going on?" I said, "Well, I just ran home from basketball practice." And he said, "Well, why'd you run? Why'd you run the whole way?" And I said, "Because, Dad, I don't know if you've noticed," being kind of sarcastic, but we kind of live in a tough neighborhood. And he looked at me for a second and I said, "You know what? I didn't want to get beat up." And my dad thought for a moment. And I remember he said to me at that moment, he said, "You know what? You've been beat up before. You're okay. Stop being afraid." And in that moment, I think that whole idea upset me a little bit. And so I said, "Well, what if they kill me, Dad? What if they kill me?" I thought that would get him. And my dad thought about it for a second. And then he said, "You know what? You're a good boy. You're doing all the good stuff. You're doing the right stuff." He said, "If they kill you, you're in a better place. Quit running around so scared. Stand up tall, stand up strong, be proud. Don't be afraid." And I remember, at that moment thinking, this is the craziest thing ever. My dad just told me if I get killed, I'm in a better place. And he told me, stop being afraid. Does he not know the neighborhood we live in? And I remember the more I thought about it, the more I realized that he was right. You know what? I really needed to stop being afraid. I really needed to stop running around in fear. And it really kind of opened up the world to me. And I remember after that, I never, I wasn't dumb enough to put myself in in bad situations, but whenever I had to be in a situation where things weren't perfect or things were kind of tough, I stood up strong and tall, and I looked like not a victim. And I think that was an important thing for me. But it also opened up a world to where, you know, when I would face things that were a little bit frightening to me, I just decided I had a choice. I could either step into it and face it. And by frightening, I don't mean physically harming to me, but more just something I didn't want to do because I might not be good at it. I remember just stepping into things, just stepping in and just saying, you know what? I can be frightened all I want, but if I'm going to do this, I'm just going to do it, right? And I would step in and do those things that I was afraid of. And frankly, I think when we all first try something new, or we're tasked with something that's new that we're not good at, it can be frightening. It can be scary. We don't want to feel stupid. And I realized as I kept stepping into things I wasn't good at, that nobody's good at things when they first start, right? And you have to try things and do things for a while before you start to get more comfortable and good at it. And it kind of became this thing that I did throughout my life. If I saw a challenge that I didn't really want to do and it kind of scared me or frightened me or made me nervous, or I thought I'm going to be embarrassed because I'm not going to look good, I just stepped into it. And I realized by stepping into it, I would make the mistakes I needed to make and I would adjust and eventually I could get good at it. And the point to this whole story for me was uh, none of us are good at something when we first try it. And I think too often we just don't try things or we don't attempt things because we're afraid we're not going to be good at it. And the truth is we're not. But if we realize we're not going to be good at it when we first go into it, but we still step into it, we can go into it with this attitude is probably going to fail. I'm going to make mistakes. I might even be embarrassed a little bit. But the more I do it and the more I face this, the better I'm going to get at it. I heard one time a uh, a speaker. He said that when you first start publicly speaking, you're going to suck. He said then you do it again and you suck a little less, and you do it again and you suck a little less, and then eventually you suck so less that you're actually good. And he said it's a process we all have to go through. And I realized, that that was something that had been bred into me by my father, telling me that story about, it's not going to kill me. It might embarrass me a little bit, but if I want to get better at something, I have to step into it now, even if I'm horrible at it, and really learn to get better at it as I go through that process. So the point of this story is very simple. If there's something you don't want to do because you're afraid you might not be good at it, the reality is you're not going to be good at it. But that shouldn't prevent you from stepping into it and trying and watching kind of your results. Pay attention to where you fail and make adjustments. And you can become a good at a lot of stuff that you thought you weren't very good at. And one of those things for me was my wife was very kind and loving and nurturing with my kids. I wasn't. I was a disciplinarian hard, and I realized at one point that that wasn't going to serve me long term with my kids. And so I asked my wife. I said, "Kind of show me what you're doing." And I need to learn how you're doing it. And I'm not going to be good at it, but that's okay. I'm still going to do it. And I'm going to try to figure out how I can combine, what I'm good at with what my wife was good at and create something that allowed my wife and I to do our very best together as a couple to raise the kids. So hopefully that's helpful. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time. Bye bye.